Hope's joy arrived quietly at first, like a fragile light she scarcely dared to believe in. It was not announced with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with a tremor in her voice and a softness in her eyes that Liam recognized instantly. When she finally told him she was pregnant, the words seemed to hover between them, almost afraid of their own weight. And then came the second revelation, even more astonishing, delivered with a breathless mixture of wonder and disbelief. She was carrying twins. For a fleeting, incandescent moment, the world aligned itself around that truth. Liam felt as though the air itself had shifted, heavy with possibility and promise. The years of uncertainty, the fractures in their past, the disappointments that had taught them caution instead of hope, all receded into the background. In their place stood an image so vivid it felt tangible, two new lives, entwined with theirs, reshaping their future in ways that finally made sense. Liam's happiness was immediate and unguarded, the kind that erupted before fear could intervene. He laughed, stunned by the sheer magnitude of it, and then fell silent as the reality settled in. Twins meant chaos, responsibility, exhaustion, and a love multiplied beyond imagination. He saw Hope differently in that moment, not because she had changed, but because the life growing inside her reframed everything. She was radiant not in the dramatic sense, but in a quieter, deeper way, as though something essential within her had found its place. They talked late into the night, voices low and reverent, mapping out dreams that suddenly felt within reach. Names were considered and discarded. Practical concerns surfaced only briefly, dismissed by the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. For once, the future did not feel fragile. It felt solid, anchored by the promise of new beginnings. Hope carried that happiness with her into the days that followed, protecting it as one might protect a delicate flame from the wind. She noticed small changes in her body, each one interpreted through the lens of joy rather than anxiety. Fatigue became a sign of life, nausea a confirmation that something extraordinary was happening within her. She allowed herself to imagine a home filled with the sounds of children, a rhythm of life that felt restorative after so much emotional upheaval. Even her fears softened, rendered manageable by the belief that this pregnancy was a gift meant to heal old wounds. Liam watched her closely, his protectiveness intensifying with each passing day, but he shared her optimism, convinced that this time, happiness would not be taken from them. The ultrasound appointment was meant to be a celebration, another step in transforming hope into certainty. Hope entered the clinic with a cautious smile, her hand resting instinctively on her abdomen, as if she could already feel the presence of the two lives growing inside her. The room was cool and quiet, the atmosphere clinical but familiar. She lay back, expecting reassurance, the steady rhythm of heartbeats that would confirm everything she believed. Liam stood beside her, his attention fixed on the screen, waiting for the image that would make their joy undeniable. The technician's initial silence did not alarm them at first. They assumed it was part of the process, a necessary focus before the reveal. But as the moments stretched on, something shifted. The technician's expression changed almost imperceptibly, her professional composure tightening in a way that Hope sensed before she understood. Questions were asked that felt out of place, requests for additional images that disrupted the easy narrative Hope had constructed in her mind. When the doctor entered the room, the weight of that shift became undeniable. The joy that had filled the space moments earlier evaporated, replaced by a tension so sudden it left Hope breathless. The words that followed did not land all at once. They arrived in fragments, clinical and precise, yet devastating in their implications. A mass had been detected. Further tests suggested it was a tumor. The pregnancy, instead of being a source of healing, was placing immense strain on Hope's body, exacerbating a condition that could not be ignored. Hope felt as though the world had tilted beneath her. The twins, whose existence had already begun to define her sense of self, suddenly existed within a context of danger and uncertainty. The doctor spoke calmly, outlining options, risks, probabilities, but the language felt distant, as though it belonged to another reality entirely. The pregnancy, they explained, was compromising Hope's health in ways that could become life-threatening if left unaddressed. Treatment could not be delayed indefinitely. The conclusion, delivered with careful empathy, was unavoidable. To protect Hope's life, the pregnancy would have to be terminated so that the tumor could be treated aggressively and without further complication. Liam's reaction was visceral. He felt a surge of anger, not directed at anyone in particular, but at the cruelty of a universe that had offered them joy only to snatch it away with such precision. He wanted to argue, to demand alternatives, to believe that there was some path that would preserve both Hope's health and the lives of their unborn children. But as the medical reality settled in, resistance gave way to a hollow, aching clarity. Hope's safety was not negotiable. No dream, no future, no imagined happiness could outweigh her life. The knowledge did not make the decision easier, it made it necessary. Hope listened in silence, her expression composed in a way that frightened Liam more than tears would have. She absorbed the information with a stillness that felt unnatural, as though she had retreated inward to a place where the pain could not reach her all at once. The twins, so real to her moments ago, now existed only in memory and imagination, their future erased before it had truly begun. The grief arrived not as a single overwhelming wave, but as a slow, suffocating pressure that settled into her chest. She nodded when asked if she understood, her voice barely audible when she confirmed that she did. In that moment, she felt suspended between two unbearable truths: the love she already felt for her children, and the knowledge that letting them go was the only way to survive. The days that followed unfolded in a blur of appointments, consultations, and quiet, devastating conversations. Hope and Liam retreated into a shared silence, speaking only when necessary, their words measured and careful. The decision to end the pregnancy was made together, but it carried a weight that neither of them could fully articulate. It was not simply a medical procedure. It was the loss of a future they had already begun to inhabit. Hope grieved in fragments, her sorrow punctuated by moments of numbness that frightened her almost as much as the pain. Liam struggled with his own sense of helplessness, haunted by the knowledge that no amount of love or determination could alter the outcome. When they chose to keep the truth private, it was not out of shame, but self-preservation. The world had a way of transforming private pain into public spectacle, and Hope could not bear the thought of her loss becoming fodder for speculation or pity. She feared the weight of Brooke's grief-driven reactions, the way her mother's love could overwhelm even the most fragile emotional boundaries. She feared, too, the unintended cruelty of Steffi's response, not because Steffi would celebrate her pain deliberately, but because history had taught Hope how easily triumph and tragedy could intertwine in the eyes of others. Liam shared those fears, recognizing how quickly their deeply personal decision could be misinterpreted, judged, or weaponized. They agreed, without formal discussion, to present a version of reality that excluded the truth. The pregnancy would simply fade from conversation, an unspoken chapter closed before it could be read. Hope would undergo treatment quietly, attributing her absence or fatigue to manageable health concerns that invited no further scrutiny. Liam would stand beside her, offering explanations when necessary, deflecting questions with practiced ease. The secrecy felt protective at first, a shield against the world's intrusion. But as time passed, it became a burden that pressed down on them both, reshaping their interactions in subtle, corrosive ways. Hope's grief did not diminish with silence, it intensified. Each day, she carried the knowledge of what she had lost alone, her sorrow rendered invisible by the normalcy she was expected to perform. She smiled at family gatherings, laughed at jokes that no longer reached her, and congratulated others on their happiness with a composure that masked the ache beneath. The sight of Carter and Daphne's joy, so unguarded and publicly celebrated, cut deeper than she anticipated. She did not resent them, but their happiness served as a mirror, reflecting everything she had been denied. In their laughter, she heard echoes of the life she had briefly imagined and then lost. Liam watched her retreat inward, alarm growing alongside his own exhaustion. He worried constantly, not only about her physical health, but about the emotional toll of carrying such profound loss in isolation. He tried to be her anchor, offering comfort in quiet gestures rather than words, but he felt the strain of the secret eroding his own stability. Each lie, no matter how small, chipped away at his sense of integrity. He feared that the distance growing between them, born of unspoken grief, would become permanent if left unaddressed. Yet he also feared that exposing the truth would unleash a wave of scrutiny and judgment that hope was not prepared to endure. At night, when the world fell silent, the weight of their loss settled in fully. Hope lay awake, her thoughts circling memories that never had a chance to become real. She imagined the twins as they might have been, constructing personalities and futures that existed only in her mind. The pain was sharp and intimate, a reminder that motherhood had already begun for her, even if it had ended too soon. Liam, lying beside her, felt her quiet sobs and wished desperately that he could absorb her pain, that he could offer something more than presence and understanding. Their relationship, once buoyed by shared dreams, now navigated a landscape shaped by grief and restraint. They loved each other deeply, but love alone could not resolve the tension created by their secrecy. Conversations skirted around the truth, each of them aware of the emotional territory they were avoiding. The effort to maintain normalcy became exhausting, a performance that left little room for genuine healing. They were united in loss, yet isolated within it, each carrying aspects of the pain the other could not fully reach. Still, beneath the sorrow and strain, there remained a fragile resilience. Hope found moments of strength in acknowledging her own survival, recognizing that choosing life was not a betrayal of her children, but an act of courage shaped by love. Liam found purpose in advocating for her health, ensuring she received the best possible care, and reminding himself that the future, though altered, was not entirely foreclosed. Together, they learned to exist within uncertainty, to accept that healing would not be linear or predictable. As they moved forward, the secret remained a constant presence, shaping their days and nights in ways both subtle and profound. It tested their bond, forcing them to confront the limits of silence and the cost of protection. Yet it also revealed the depth of their commitment, the willingness to endure judgment and isolation in service of one another's well-being. Their journey was no longer defined by the promise of new life, but by the quiet, unrelenting work of survival and love in the aftermath of loss. In witnessing the happiness of others, Hope and Liam were reminded not only of what they had lost, but of what they still possessed. Their connection, forged in both joy and devastation, remained intact, though altered by experience. The future they envisioned would never be the one they had imagined that night they learned about the twins, but it was still a future worth fighting for. And within that fight lay the possibility, however distant, of healing, understanding, and a hope reshaped rather than extinguished. When the truth finally reached Katie Logan, it did not arrive gently. It came in fragments, carried not by gossip or public confession, but through Liam, whose voice betrayed a fatigue that went far beyond professional stress. He had approached her under the pretense of business, discussions about the Logan brand that required focus and clarity, but the weight he carried made it impossible to maintain that fiction for long. When he spoke of hope, of illness, of a decision that had been forced rather than chosen, something in Katie shifted immediately. The words, terminated pregnancy, and tumor, did not exist for her as abstract medical terms. They struck with a visceral familiarity, echoing years of lived experience, loss, fear, and survival. In that moment, every unresolved tension within the Logan family fell away, rendered insignificant by the stark reality of a young woman facing a battle that no one should endure alone. Katie's first response was not anger, confusion, or judgment, but clarity. She did not interrogate Liam for details he was not ready to give, nor did she allow herself the luxury of emotional indulgence. Her instincts sharpened into purpose. As a mother, she recognized the specific devastation that comes with losing a child before the world has a chance to know them. As a woman who had faced her own health crises, she understood the terror of confronting mortality while trying to remain functional, composed, and strong for the sake of others. Hope's pain was not theoretical to Katie. It was intimate, familiar, and immediate. She reached out to Hope not as a matriarch asserting authority, but as a woman extending sanctuary. There was no dramatic confrontation, no emotional flood that demanded immediate catharsis. Katie approached with quiet steadiness, allowing Hope to set the pace, to reveal only what she could bear to articulate. When Hope finally sat across from her, fragile beneath the surface composure she had perfected, Katie saw not just grief but exhaustion. This was not sorrow that had been allowed to breathe, it was grief compressed into silence, layered with fear, secrecy, and the relentless effort to appear normal. Katie listened without interruption, her presence anchored and unwavering. She did not rush to reassure, nor did she attempt to frame Hope's loss as something that could be quickly healed or rationalized. Instead, she acknowledged the enormity of what had been taken, the cruelty of timing, the injustice of being forced to choose survival over motherhood. Her empathy was not performative. It was rooted in memory, in nights spent waiting for test results, in the knowledge of how profoundly a woman's body can betray her while demanding resilience in return. As Hope spoke, something loosened within her for the first time since the diagnosis. Katie's understanding did not feel conditional or overwhelming. It did not carry the emotional volatility Hope had come to associate with Brooke's love, a love that often arrived tangled with fear, control, and unfiltered reaction. With Katie, there was no expectation that grief be shared publicly, or immediately transformed into strength. There was space for ambiguity, for pain that did not yet know what it needed. Katie moved swiftly from compassion to action, not because she sought control, but because she understood the value of informed choice. Drawing on years of navigating medical systems, she began researching specialists, consulting oncologists, whose reputations were built on both expertise and humanity. She sought second and third opinions, not to undermine the initial diagnosis, but to ensure that Hope's path forward was grounded in the best possible care. Each recommendation was offered gently, framed as an option rather than a directive. Hope, overwhelmed by the complexity of her situation, found relief in allowing someone else to shoulder the logistical burden she no longer had the strength to manage. This practical support carried an emotional weight far greater than its actions suggested. For Hope, it was the first time since the loss that she felt protected without being smothered, guided without being overridden. Katie's presence became a stabilizing force, a reminder that survival did not require isolation. In the quiet rhythm of appointments, research calls, and shared moments of stillness, a new bond began to form between them. It was not born of obligation or family hierarchy, but of shared womanhood, of mutual recognition. This connection did not erase the complicated dynamics within the Logan family, but it softened them. Brooke, who had been kept at a distance by Hope's silence and fear, began to sense a shift. The tension that once flared between mother and daughter over autonomy, over emotional boundaries, eased subtly as Katie became an intermediary not by design, but by presence. Brooke's love for Hope had always been fierce, but it was also volatile, shaped by her own unresolved trauma, an instinctive need to fix what frightened her. Hope had learned, painfully, that vulnerability with her mother often came at the cost of emotional equilibrium. Katie did not replace Brooke, nor did she attempt to redefine her role. Instead, she absorbed some of the emotional pressure that might otherwise have erupted into conflict. She spoke to Brooke when necessary, not revealing confidences, but reframing the situation with clarity and restraint. She reminded her sister that this was not a moment for panic or control, but for patience and trust. Katie's words carried authority not because she demanded it, but because they were grounded in experience. Brooke, accustomed to reacting rather than waiting, found herself listening in a way she had not before. For Hope, this shift was palpable. She no longer felt trapped between protecting her mother from the truth and protecting herself from her mother's response. Katie's involvement created a buffer, a space where Hope could exist without constantly anticipating emotional fallout. This did not eliminate the grief, nor did it resolve the deeper fractures within the family, but it allowed healing to begin without the constant threat of escalation. Liam, watching this dynamic unfold, felt both relief and guilt. He had carried the secret for so long, believing silence was the only way to preserve Hope's stability, yet the quiet support Katie provided illuminated what had been missing. He saw Hope breathe more freely in Katie's presence, her shoulders relaxing in ways they rarely did at home. It confirmed what he had suspected, but could not articulate. Grief required witnesses who knew when to speak and when to remain silent. Katie's support extended beyond Hope alone. She acknowledged Liam's role not as a secondary figure, but as a partner equally burdened by loss. She recognized the toll that secrecy and fear had taken on him, the constant vigilance required to maintain a facade while navigating despair. Without absolving him of his own emotional distance, she offered understanding, reminding him that strength did not mean suppressing pain indefinitely. Her words did not fix what was broken, but they eased the isolation that had begun to corrode his resolve. As weeks passed and Hope's treatment progressed, the bond between her and Katie deepened. It manifested in small, unremarkable moments, shared cups of tea in silence, conversations that drifted without destination, a hand held without explanation. These moments did not demand transformation. They simply allowed Hope to exist as she was, unguarded and incomplete. Katie never asked her to be brave. She never framed the loss as something that would make Hope stronger. She understood that survival was not a moral achievement, but a necessity, and that healing did not require justification. In this space, Hope began to articulate emotions she had previously buried. She spoke of the twins not as an abstract loss, but as individuals she had already loved. She allowed herself to grieve without apology, to acknowledge the anger and envy she felt when confronted with others' happiness, particularly the public joy surrounding Carter and Daphne. Katie did not correct her or urge gratitude. She validated the complexity of those emotions, reminding Hope that love and resentment could coexist without negating one another. This validation was transformative. For the first time since the loss, Hope felt seen not as a symbol of resilience or tragedy, but as a woman navigating an impossible reality. The pressure to perform normalcy began to loosen its grip. She still guarded the secret publicly, but internally, she no longer felt entirely alone. The ripple effects of this connection extended outward, subtly reshaping family interactions. Brooke, sensing the shift in Hope's demeanor, began to respond differently. Without knowing the full truth, she noticed that Hope was less reactive, less defensive, and that her presence carried a quiet gravity that discouraged impulsive confrontation. Katie's influence, though understated, altered the emotional landscape, creating a tone of caution and respect where there had once been volatility. This did not resolve all conflicts, nor did it absolve past wounds, but it marked a turning point. The Logan family, long defined by intensity and entanglement, experienced a moment of recalibration. Pain remained, but it was no longer amplified by misunderstanding. Silence remained, but it was no longer synonymous with abandonment. For Hope, the most profound change was internal. The loss would never be undone, and the future she once imagined was irrevocably altered, but the presence of Katie reframed what support could look like. It taught her that survival did not require isolation, that strength could be shared without being diluted. It reminded her that motherhood, even interrupted, left an indelible imprint, one that did not disappear simply because it was not visible to the world. Katie, in offering this support, found her own sense of purpose renewed. She did not position herself as a savior or authority. She simply showed up, guided by empathy forged through hardship. In doing so, she bridged gaps that had long seemed insurmountable, not through confrontation, but through care. As Hope continued her treatment, carrying both grief and resolve forward, she did so with a new understanding of family. Love did not always arrive loudly or demand recognition. Sometimes, it arrived quietly, steady and unyielding, in the form of a woman who understood what it meant to lose and to endure, and who refused to let another woman face that reality alone. And in that quiet solidarity, amid uncertainty and pain, something enduring took root. Not the restoration of what had been lost, but the affirmation that even in the aftermath of devastation, connection could still form, healing could still begin, and compassion, when offered without agenda, could soften even the deepest wounds.